The night my husband broke my arm, I was 38 weeks pregnant. I was 9 months pregnant, and I still told the nurse I fell. I sat in that emergency room. The paper on the table crinkled every time I moved. The fluorescent lights were very white. My daughter was kicking inside me, and I looked at my own reflection in the dark window across the room. I did not recognize the woman I saw, not because I looked different, because I looked exactly the same as I had trained myself to look for 2 years. Composed, fine, nothing to see here. That was the moment I understood how much of myself I had given away. I had married a billionaire, a powerful man, a man with $300 million in government contracts and a smile that opened every room he walked into. What he did not know, this was that my brother was watching. My brother, who had been waiting for one phone call for 18 months. My brother, the general. And the night I finally made that call, everything changed. Not just for me, for him. Some women discover their strength the hard way. This story is about what happens when a man mistakes silence for weakness and finds out, far too late, exactly who he married. If you have ever made yourself smaller to keep the peace, this one is for you. Stay with me.
The sound came first, clean, sharp, like a branch snapping in winter. Then silence. Then her own voice, flat and strange to her ears. I fell. The emergency room at Mercy General smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. The fluorescent lights were very white, the kind of white that makes everyone look slightly wrong. Claire Hartwell Ashford sat on the examination table and tried to breathe through her nose the way the pregnancy book said. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The paper beneath her crinkled every time she shifted. She was 38 weeks and 4 days pregnant. She had been counting days since week 32. Grant said that was obsessive. She thought it was the only thing keeping her sane. The attending nurse was young, maybe 24. She had eyes that were professionally neutral and a clipboard she wrote on with a deliberate kind of slowness, like each word was a decision. And you said you fell, the nurse said. Not a question. Claire noticed that. Yes, Claire said. On the stairs near the foyers, the marble ones, I've been telling my husband we need to redo those stairs. They're too steep. She heard herself say it, steady, reasonable. She had gotten very good at steady and reasonable. The nurse wrote something, possibly underlined it. Claire could not see the clipboard from where she was sitting, and she did not try to look. Looking would seem anxious. She was not supposed to seem anxious. The nurse looked up, looked at Claire's face, then at the arm held against her chest, then at Claire's face again. The pattern of the fracture is a little unusual for a fall, the nurse said. I grabbed the railing on the way down, Claire said. I must have twisted it somehow. She had built her story in the car on the way here. The driver, not Grant, never Grant for things like this, too many witnesses in emergency rooms, had navigated the city in silence while Claire constructed her explanation the way she used to construct structural load models in graduate school. Weight-bearing, nothing that would collapse under pressure. The nurse held her gaze for one moment longer than professional neutrality required. Then she wrote something else and left to get the doctor. Claire was alone. The baby kicked. Hard. Once. Like punctuation. She looked up. There was a window in the examination room. The glass was dark outside. It was past 11 at night, and it threw back a partial reflection. A woman in a silk maternity dress the color of pale cream. Her hair still arranged perfectly because she had fixed it in the car. Her face composed into calm. A bruise beginning at the edge of her jaw that the concealer she always kept in her purse had not entirely covered. She looked at that woman in the window. She did not recognize her, not because she looked different, because she looked exactly the same as she had trained herself to look. Composed, fine, nothing here that needs attention. That was the terrifying thing. She was this good at it. When did I get this good at this? She thought about her mother's voice. You have your father's stubbornness, baby girl. She had always taken that as a compliment. She had not spoken to her mother in 4 months. Grant said the visits were stressful, too much stimulation for the pregnancy. Her mother had agreed to stay away. Claire had let it happen. She looked at the woman in the window. She looked away. Dr. Helen Marsh came in 3 minutes later. She had the particular economy of movement of someone 11 hours into a shift with 3 more to go. She pulled up the X-ray on the wall screen without preamble. She said the fracture was torsional. She explained it with the careful precision of someone choosing each word like a stone to step on. Torsional meant the force had been applied while the arm was being held, while it was being gripped and twisted. Not the kind of fracture you got from grabbing a railing. Dr. Marsh did not say, "Someone grabbed your arm and twisted it. She did not have to." She said, "I'm going to need to ask you some questions alone." Claire said, "My husband will be here soon." Dr. Marsh said, "That's why I'm asking now." The clock on the wall ticked, once, twice, 3 times. Claire thought of 17 different things to say. Professional things, calm things, things that would close this door gently and let her go home. She said none of them. She said, "He didn't mean to." And even as she said it, she heard how it sounded. She had heard other women say those words in news stories and court documents and the kind of articles people share online with sad faces. She had never understood before, this exact moment, how much courage it actually took to say something that small. Grant arrived at 9 minutes past 11. He wore a charcoal blazer over a white shirt, no tie. He had dressed for the optics of a man who was relaxed at home and came out quickly when something unexpected happened. He was carrying flowers from the gift shop downstairs. Yellow ones, small and slightly plastic-looking. He remembered she liked yellow. He was very good at remembering small things. He put one hand on her uninjured arm and looked at Dr. Marsh with the precise calibration of appropriate worry. He said all the right things. He used the word terrible twice. He used the word frightened once. Dr. Marsh watched him with the specific attention of a woman who had been doing this for 20 years. Grant did not notice. Men like Grant never noticed the way women watched them. Claire watched him from a distance that had nothing to do with the size of the room. She watched him perform husbandly concern, and she thought, "I don't know this person." The thought arrived very quietly. No drama. Just, "I do not know this person." She had looked at this face across breakfast tables for 2 years. She had watched these hands sign checks and gesture at business associates and button the same white shirts. Tonight, these hands had grabbed her arm, twisted. The crack had been very clean. She knew the hands. She did not know the man. There was a difference. She was only beginning to understand how significant. The fetal monitor beeped steadily. Her daughter's heartbeat, she had privately decided it was a daughter, moved through the room like a small, insistent argument. Still here. Still fighting. Both of us. While the nurses fitted a temporary splint and ran the fetal monitoring, Grant held her good hand and said quietly, when the nurse stepped out for a moment, "You need to be more careful. Look what you've done to yourself." His voice was soft. His thumb traced a small circle on the back of her hand. Gentle. As if the gentleness was proof. As if it erased the thing that came before it. Claire looked at his thumb, moving in its small circle. She thought, "I know this gesture. He uses it when he wants me to understand that this is over now. That whatever happened before the gesture is finished. That I should be grateful for the gentleness after the other thing." She thought, "I have been grateful. For 2 years, I have been grateful for the gentleness that comes after." She thought, "That is not love. That is a leash with a slack period." The nurse came back. Grant's expression rearranged itself into concern. seamlessly, the way a screen changes images when you walk past. No transition visible, just different image. Claire watched and began, very quietly, in a place he could not reach, to understand something she had been not understanding for a long time. The chapter of her life that was built around Grant Ashford's opinion of things was ending. She did not know yet what came after it, but it was ending. She could feel it the way she used to feel, the load-bearing point in a structural model, the place where pressure had exceeded capacity, the place where the material had simply had enough. The fetal monitor kept its steady rhythm. She lay back against the pillow. She thought, I need to make one phone call. I have been not making it for 2 years. She thought, tonight I am going to make it. The hospital kept her overnight. Standard protocol for a term pregnancy with trauma. Standard language, as if the word trauma were standard. Grant wanted to stay. He said so twice. The first time warmly, the second time with a particular softness that was its own kind of pressure. Dr. Marsh appeared in the doorway and said that visiting hours ended at 10. She said it pleasantly. She said it in the tone of a woman who had stood in doorways exactly like this one many times before. Grant did not push. He was too intelligent to push in front of witnesses. He kissed Claire's forehead. He told her to rest. He squeezed her hand. The injured one, lightly, just once, just enough to let her know he was still there, even when he wasn't, and left. The room was very quiet after that. Claire lay in the hospital bed and stared at the ceiling. The tiles were white. She counted them the way she counted things when she was building up to something. 32 across, 14 down, 448 total. She reached 448 and stopped. She picked up her phone. She locked it. She unlocked it. She locked it again, 3 times. The specific private ritual of someone working up to the hardest thing. She thought, what do I even say? Hey, Wade, sorry I haven't called in 6 months. My husband broke my arm. How are things with you? She thought, he's going to ask why I didn't call sooner. She thought, I don't have an answer that holds. She thought, yes, I do. I have the exact same answer every woman in this situation has. I thought it would get better. I thought it was my fault. I thought the baby would change things. I thought I was strong enough to handle it alone. She thought, none of those answers are good enough. She thought, none of them have to be. She found Wade's contact. He had a small American flag emoji next to his name because he had made her add it at Thanksgiving as a joke 2 years ago. Before Grant, before everything. She had laughed when he demanded it. She hadn't laughed like that in a long time. She pressed call. It rang 3 times. His voice came on immediately. Awake, alert, not groggy at all, though it was nearly midnight. He said, Claire? A brief pause, the kind of pause that was pure Wade, reading the room even through a phone. It's almost midnight. She said, I know. He said, what's wrong? Not a question. A statement shaped like a question. She had planned to say, nothing. I'm sorry for calling so late. I just wanted to hear your voice. She had plans for saying nothing so deeply embedded. They had become automatic. She said, I'm in the hospital. Silence, the military kind. Controlled, gathering information before responding. The baby? He said. Baby's fine. The monitor looks good. It's my arm. I have a fracture. Another silence. This one longer. This one different. Claire, he said. Her name in his voice. The way he'd said it when they were children and she'd done something reckless and he was assessing the damage. I fell, she said. He said, did you fall? Not a question. Wade, did you fall? She looked at the ceiling tiles. 32 across, 14 down, she said, no. What she expected after that, urgency, an explosion of protection, the loud, forceful reaction she had been bracing for, which was part of why she hadn't called. What she got? Quiet. Wade was quiet for a long time. She could hear him breathing, slow and controlled and utterly still. Then he said, "How long?" She said, "Wade." "How long, Claire?" She looked at the ceiling. She said, 18 months, maybe a little more. The quiet that followed was the most frightening thing she had ever heard. Not because it was angry, because it was controlled. Because there was nothing more dangerous in the world than a careful, disciplined man with cause. He said, "Is the baby safe right now?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Are you safe right now?" She said, "I'm in the hospital." He said, "That's not what I asked." She said, "I'm safe right now. Yes." He said, "Okay." A pause. "I need you to do something. Don't call me back on this number. I'm going to send you a different number in a few minutes. Text only. Can you do that?" She said, "You're not going to fume, Claire?" His voice settled into something very steady. "I am a general of the United States Army. I know how to handle things. Will you trust me?" She thought about the last 2 years of trusting Grant Ashford. She thought about how that had worked out. She said, "Yes." He said, "Good. Sleep if you can. In the morning, call Leona. Don't go back to that house alone. Don't go back without a plan." He was quiet a moment. Then, "I love you." He hung up. 40 seconds later, a text from a number she didn't recognize. No name, just a number. She saved it as WH. She locked her phone. For the first time in 18 months, she did not unlock it again. The night nurse came in at midnight to check the fetal monitor. She was older, gray-haired, efficient in the way of someone who had long stopped needing to perform efficiency. She adjusted the monitor leads and made a small note on her chart. She said, without looking up, "We have a social worker on staff, available nights too. If you ever felt like talking to someone." Claire said, "I'm fine, thank you." The nurse nodded. She reached into her scrubs pocket and handed Claire a folded brochure about postpartum resources. Inside the brochure, tucked between the pages, was a plain business card. On the back, in small ballpoint pen, a hotline number, and one word, whenever. The nurse left. Claire held the card for a long time. She thought about how many women had sat in this exact room, this exact bed, this exact paper-covered table, with this exact broken arm and this exact story about stairs. She thought about the nurse keeping those cards in her pocket, every shift. For years, probably, waiting for the right moment to hand one over. She put the card in the pocket of her hospital gown. She kept it. Lying in the hospital quiet, monitor beeping softly, daughter shifting against her ribs, Claire let herself think about Columbia. The acceptance letter had come on a Tuesday. She was 26. She had cried. The overwhelmed kind. The rightness kind. She called Wade first, then her mother. She went out for tacos with Leona, and they stayed until the restaurant staff started stacking chairs. She met Grant at an architecture gala 6 weeks later. He was tall and certain, and he looked at her the way particular men look at particular things they intend to acquire. She had thought it was attraction. She had thought it was love. It had felt, at the time, like being fully seen by someone powerful. She deferred Columbia for 1 year, then another. Then she became pregnant, and it seemed irrelevant to keep deferring. She simply let the deadline expire. She had never told Wade about Columbia. She had been afraid he would be angry. He would not have been angry Wade was not the type. But fear does not require accuracy. Fear just needs a door. She lay in the hospital dark and thought about her notebooks, 40 of them, filled with architectural sketches, bridges mostly, the way they distributed weight, the elegant mathematics of a thing that could be beautiful and structural at the same time. She had packed them carefully when she moved into Grant's house. She did not know where the box was now. She had not looked for it in 2 years. Somewhere in a house that is not mine, in a storage room or a basement, there are 40 notebooks that are more me than anything I have been for the past 2 years. She thought, I want them back. She had not wanted anything for herself in a very long time. The smallness of that want, 40 old notebooks, was somehow the most clarifying thing she had felt all night. The baby kicked, gentle this time. Claire put her good hand on her stomach. She said quietly to the dark, Hi, sweetheart. I know. At 6 in the morning, her phone lit up. A text from Leona. It said, I'm already in the car. What's your room number? Leona Price arrived at 6:47. She had not slept. She had driven 40 minutes in the thin gray light of early morning. She was carrying 2 coffees, one regular, one decaf, because Leona always remembered the specific practical thing even in an emergency, especially in an emergency. She walked into the hospital room and stopped. She looked at the splint, at the bruise along Claire's jaw, yellowing at the edges now, at Claire's face in the flat hospital light. She set both coffees very carefully on the bedside table. She said, Claire Marie Hartwell, how long? Claire started to say, It's not. Leona said, I am a nurse. I have spent 3 years working with the domestic violence unit. I know what a torsional fracture means, so please don't tell me it's not what I think. A pause. Claire said, 18 months. Leona closed her eyes, opened them. She nodded the clinical nod, the one that set aside what she felt, because there was work to do. She sat down. She picked up both coffees. She handed Claire the decaf. She said, Okay, tell me everything. Start from the beginning. And Claire started talking. She talked for 30 minutes, haltingly at first, then with increasing steadiness. The way you tell a story you have kept too long. It comes out in the wrong order, looping back, correcting itself. She told Leona about the first time, how she convinced herself it was a one-time thing, the stress of a new development deal. He had apologized so completely. She told Leona about the second time and the third, and the way the gaps between them got shorter while the explanations stayed the same. She told Leona about the isolation, the slow, deliberate management of her world until it was just him and her and the shape he wanted her to fit. Leona listened. She did not say, I knew. She did not say, I was afraid of something like this. Both things were true, and neither was what Claire needed. She said, You're not going back to that house. Claire said, No. Leona said, My place then, as long as you need. She said it the way you say things that are not offers, but facts. That was when Ruth Brennan appeared in the doorway. Ruth, 57 years old, 22 years as housekeeper to the Ashford family. Wearing a windbreaker and carrying a canvas tote bag that was worn at the handles and reinforced at the bottom, the kind of bag that had been in regular use for a long time. She said, I heard from the driver. I came as soon as I could. Claire said, Ruth, you didn't have to. Ruth crossed the room and sat down in the chair closest to the bed. She said, I have been keeping something for 14 months. I did not know the right time to give it to you. I kept thinking, next month, when things settle, when the baby comes. I kept finding reasons to wait. She reached into the tote bag. She placed a thick envelope on the bedside table. "There are photographs in there," she said. "Dates, notes I wrote in my car after things I saw in that house. Injuries you had that you called nothing. I photographed them." She kept going. "There is also documentation of a relationship between Mr. Ashford and a young woman named Paige Colton. She works for his subsidiary. I found evidence on a night he thought I had gone home. I had come back for my keys. I photographed what I found. The room was very quiet. The fetal monitor beeped. Leona was looking at Ruth the way you look at someone who turns out to be extraordinary when you weren't expecting it." Claire looked at the envelope. She thought, this woman was watching. From the kitchen, from the edges of rooms, the way women watch over other women when they cannot do more than watch. She was keeping records in her own way, in a worn canvas bag in her car. She thought, I was not as alone as I believed. She picked up the envelope with her good hand. She said, "Thank you, Ruth." Ruth said, "I should have given it to you sooner. I'm sorry I didn't." Claire held the envelope in her lap. She thought, "No, you gave it to me when I was ready to use it. There's a difference. Later." After Ruth and Leona stepped into the hallway to give her a moment, Claire went to the hospital bathroom. She ran cold water over her good wrist. Not the injured one, just the left one. She ran it until it was cold, and then she turned off the tap. She looked at her face in the mirror, really looked, without managing what she showed, without the performance. The bruise along her jaw was properly purple now. Her arm in its splint, her stomach enormous with the baby coming any day. She thought, 28 years old. This is 28. She thought about 22, 23, the girl who kept notebooks, who could argue about structural design for 4 hours and never run out of things to say, who had a backpack that weighed 15 pounds from books and papers and ideas she was still figuring out. She thought, I packed that girl in a box, and I told myself it was practical. She thought, Grant didn't take her, I gave her away. I traded her for beautiful rooms and the feeling of being chosen completely. She thought it. The problem was, what he wanted to choose wasn't me. It was the idea of me, the version that fit in his frame without any edges showing. The real me kept leaking out around those edges, and he kept pressing her back in. She looked at the bruise. She touched it lightly, just her fingertips. She said quietly to her reflection, You are still here. Not triumphant, not yet. Just a fact. A stubborn, small fact that had survived 2 years of pressure. The baby shifted. Once, like agreement. She straightened. She dried her face with the hospital paper towel. She went back out to Leona and Ruth. She said, I need a lawyer. Then she said something she had not said out loud in a very long time. She said it quietly, standing at the bathroom door, before she opened it to go back into the room. She said it to herself. I am not crazy. I know what I saw. I know what happened. I have known what was happening for 18 months. I stayed because leaving felt impossible. But staying is worse. It has always been worse. I deserve better than this. She opened the door. She picked up the envelope. She held it with both hands, the splinted right and the steady left. It was heavy. 14 months of a woman watching from the edges of rooms, writing things down in a car, waiting for the right moment. Claire held it and thought, I am going to use every single page. Grant came to the hospital at 9 in the morning. He came alone. He had calculated that alone was better than with attorneys or his mother, better for the atmosphere. He was carrying flowers, real ones this time, from an actual florist. Not the gift shop. He had called someone who delivered. Yellow flowers, larger and more expensive than the ones from the night before. He was wearing the blue shirt. Claire had told him once, 2 years ago, that the blue shirt made his eyes look kind. He remembered that. Leona was still in the room when he arrived. His expression did something very small and very controlled when he saw her. A micro adjustment, gone in under a second. He had never liked Leona. He had called her that one with a particular tone. He had asked Claire, more than once, beschreibt, whether she really needed to maintain that friendship, whether it was worth the energy. Claire had kept the friendship. It was one of the few things she kept. Grant said, "Leona, I didn't expect you." Leona said, "I'm sure." 2 words, the warmest, most devastating 2 words in the English language, when said in exactly that tone. Grant turned to Claire. He held out the flowers. He performed concern with complete fluency. He asked about the baby. He asked how she slept. He said all the right things in the right order. Claire looked at him. This was the moment she understood what Layer 4 actually felt like. He was not monstrous. He was not trembling with guilt or trembling with anything. He was simply there, doing what he had always done, with the same practiced ease as always. He had walked in here with yellow flowers and the blue shirt, and he was performing husband concern the way he performed everything else. It was a role, a comfortable one he had never been asked to put down. She thought, this is what hurt me, not a monster out of a nightmare. This ordinary, expensive, carefully managed performance. She felt something shift in her chest, not rage, something colder, something more useful, clarity. She said, "Grant, I'd like you to leave." He said, "I'm sorry. Please leave the room." His expression recalibrated, very smoothly. He said pleasantly, "Claire, you're upset. That's completely understandable, but let's not—" She said, "I spoke to my brother last night." The flowers lowered, not dramatically, just a few inches, involuntarily. Grant knew about Wade. He had been careful about Wade the way powerful men are careful about other powerful men, keeping them at a distance, treating them as variables to manage rather than threats to take seriously. He had decided, at some point, that Wade was manageable, that Claire would not call him, that she had been sufficiently isolated from that relationship. He had been wrong about that. He said, "You called Wade." "He called me back," she said. Grant said, "Claire, your brother is very busy. There's no need to involve him in something that's—" "In what, Grant?" she said. He paused. "In something private? In an accident? In what I caused by falling on the marble stairs?" He said, "You're not yourself right now." She said, "Actually, I think I'm more myself than I've been in 2 years." His face did the thing, just for half a second, the mask slipping at one corner and then pulled back smooth. She had spent 2 years trying not to notice that thing. Now she watched it openly. She said, "I'd like you to contact Sylvia Brooks. She's a family law attorney. She'll be reaching out to your team today." The flowers were fully lowered now. His voice dropped its warmth entirely. What replaced it was businesslike and cold, the voice he used in negotiations when he had decided he did not need to be pleasant anymore. He said, "You're not being rational." She said, "I have a fractured right radius, a bruise documented by 2 medical professionals, and 14 months of documentation provided to me this morning by your housekeeper. I am being completely rational." His eyes went to the envelope on the bedside table. Something moved through them, fast, gone. Leona said from the corner of the room quietly, "There are 2 nurses at the station right outside this door." Grant looked at Leona. He looked at Claire. He looked at the envelope. He left. He did not take the flowers. They sat on the windowsill in their florist paper, bright and expensive and hollow. Claire looked at them for a long time. She thought, "I'm going to remember what those look like. Precisely what they look like. So I never mistake something like that for the real thing again." After Grant left, after the room settled back into something breathable, Leona opened Ruth's envelope properly. They spread the contents on the tray table. Photographs, Dates written in Ruth's careful, economical handwriting. Notes made in cars, in parking lots, in the brief windows when Ruth was away from the house and could write freely. Medical observations. Injuries Ruth had seen that Claire had explained away. 3 separate occasions documented with dates and descriptions. And then the other photographs. A young woman's belongings in the guest suite of the Ashford vacation property. Personal items, unmistakably belonging to someone who had been there more than once. Grant and the same woman at what appeared to be a private dinner, photographed through a window, his hand on her waist. The way he used to stand with Claire before he stopped trying. Financial documents, an apartment lease on a corporate address. Transfers to an account Ruth had identified as belonging to someone named Paige Colton, 26, events coordinator for an Ashford subsidiary. Claire looked at the photographs. She did not cry. She thought, of course there is a Paige. The Paige is not the wound. The wound was built long before Paige arrived. Paige is evidence of how little he valued the wound, how little he valued anything. She thought, I wonder if she knows what she's inside. She thought, I wonder if she also has bruises she's explaining away. She said to Leona, can you find out how to reach Paige Colton? Leona said, why? She said, because I think she might have things I need, and I think there are things she needs to hear. I was not crazy. I know what I saw. I know what happened. And now I know what I'm going to do about it. This chapter moves in 2 directions at once. Claire's world was gathering, building, each piece placed deliberately and without drama. Grant's world was beginning, though he did not yet know it. To crack. Wade Hartwell did not operate loudly. He was a general. Generals do not shout. They move resources. They identify pressure points. They think 3 steps ahead of where the odds are standing. He made 3 phone calls in the 48 hours after Claire's call. Each one short. Each one precise. Each one to someone who did not owe him anything. This was not currency. This was the consequence of 15 years of being the kind of officer whose people would follow him anywhere. The first call was to a JAG attorney. He asked one question about evidentiary standards in domestic violence cases involving public figures. The second call was to a financial crimes investigator at the FBI who had been quietly looking at Ashford Defense Solutions for contract billing irregularities for 8 months. Wade asked what that investigator would need to open a formal inquiry. The investigator told him. Wade said thank you and hung up. The third call was to a journalist he had known since a foreign correspondent interview in 2018. He did not call to leak information. He called to ask, what do you know about Grant Ashford? He listened to how long it took the journalist to answer. The journalist answered in 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a very short pause. Meanwhile, Captain Derek Shaw parked an unmarked car outside Mercy General Hospital and sat in it for 48 hours. Not as a threat, as a presence, as a message in a language men who moved in military circles understood. Grant's security chief noticed the car on the first day. He told Grant. Grant, alone in his home office that evening, did the micro-adjustment. Paige Colton took 17 hours to respond to Claire's text. The text had been simple. It had said, my name is Claire Ashford. I think we should speak. I am not your enemy. When Paige responded, she said, where? They met at a coffee shop in a neighborhood neither of them lived in. Claire arrived with Leona. She arrived without animosity. Animosity would require energy she did not have and produce results she did not want. Paige was 26 and looked younger. She had the specific expression of someone who has been waiting for a conversation while simultaneously dreading it. She was wearing a jacket with long sleeves, in late spring, in 70-degree weather. Claire noticed the sleeves. She sat down across from Paige and said, "He told you he was going to leave me, didn't he?" Paige said, "Yes, when the baby was born and things settled down. Something like that." Paige looked at her coffee, which was an answer. Claire said, "He's been saying that for a long time, to different people." Paige was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He also—" She stopped. She started again. "He hits me sometimes. He says it's because he's under stress. He says I make him do it." Claire looked at her. Different woman. Same script, word for word. She said, "You didn't provoke him. I didn't either. That's not how it works. That's what he says, so neither of us looks clearly at what he is." She said, "I have a lawyer. I have Ruth's evidence. What I have will be enough. But if you're willing to add your experience, it changes the weight of everything." "Oh," she said, "I'm not asking you to do it for me. I'm asking you to think about whether you want to be sitting across from the next woman in this chair, because there will be one. If nobody stops him, there will be one." Paige said, "He threatened my job. If I talked to anyone, he said he would." Claire said, "Wade Hartwell is my brother." A pause. Paige said, "The general?" Claire said, "Yes." A longer pause. Paige looked at her coffee. She looked at Claire. She said, "What do you need from me?" Sylvia Brooks met Claire at the hospital that same afternoon. She was 47, economical in her movements. She had a particular quality of attention. She looked at you as if she was already cataloging everything you said for future use. She had been in family law and domestic violence cases for 21 years. She had seen everything. She was surprised by nothing. She reviewed Ruth's envelope with the systematic thoroughness of someone who had been handed evidence of this kind many times before and understood its exact legal weight. She said, "This is not a difficult case, factually. He has a documented pattern. You have medical records, a forensic fracture analysis, an on-premises witness of 14 months, and potentially a second victim willing to provide an independent statement." She said, "What he has is money. Money buys delay and noise. It does not change facts." She said, "I want to file for legal separation today. I want a protective order before you leave this hospital. And I want to move on temporary custody before he has time to build a counter-narrative." Claire said, "He'll fight for custody." Sylvia said, "Men who fracture their 9 months pregnant wife's arm do not generally fare well in custody proceedings, particularly when they are simultaneously drawing the attention of federal financial investigators." Claire said, "What federal investigators?" Sylvia looked at her for a measured moment. She said, "I don't need to know the specifics of who your brother has been speaking to, but Ashford Defense Solutions appears to be about to receive a level of scrutiny it has not previously received. A man managing a federal situation has considerably fewer resources to devote to a family court battle." Claire thought about Wade. 3 short phone calls. The right questions asked of the right people. She looked out the hospital window at the city in the afternoon. She thought, "I should have called him 18 months ago." She thought, "I know why I didn't. I thought I was protecting him from something that was my problem to manage. I thought strong women handled their own marriages." She thought, "Strength is not managing alone. Strength is knowing when to let people who love you stand with you." She thought, "I know that now. Somewhere along the way I became invisible, even to myself." She thought, not anymore. She was walking back from Sylvia's meeting when she stopped at the nursery window in the corridor. Several newborns inside, small, furious with existence, entirely unaware of complexity. She stopped and looked at them. She thought, "I am already starting over. I started the moment I told Wade no." She looked at her stomach. She said very quietly, "Okay, let's go." Claire was discharged on the third day. She did not go back to the Ashford estate. She went to Leona's apartment, a two-bedroom place in a good building, warm and genuinely lived in, books on the windowsill, a plant that was thriving against all probability, a cat named Douglas, who sat in the chair across from wherever you sat and regarded you with professional neutrality. Leona had put a new mattress pad and extra pillows in the guest room because she was Leona and she always thought of the specific practical thing. That first evening, Margaret Hartwell called, Claire's mother. She had been 4 months without her daughter. Grant had asked her to stay away. Too much stimulation for the pregnancy. She had agreed because Claire had not objected and she had not wanted to make things harder. She had been holding very still about it for 4 months. She picked up on the first ring when Claire called. She said baby before anything else. Just that word. In the voice she used when Claire was 7 and had fallen off her bike, and the important thing was not the blood, but the face she made right before she cried. Claire said, "Hi, Mom." Her mother said, "I'm getting in the car." Claire said, "You don't have to do that tonight." Her mother said, "I'm already in the car." Margaret Hartwell was in Leona's living room by 10 that evening. She did not say, "I should have known." She did not say, "I had a feeling." Both were true, and neither was what Claire needed. She sat next to Claire on the couch and put her hand over Claire's, good one, and said nothing for a while. Just sat there, present, exactly there. That was enough. It was 3:14 in the morning when Claire woke. She lay still for a moment. The apartment was quiet. Leona breathing in the other room. Douglas, a warm, solid weight at the foot of the bed. She could not go back to sleep. She got up. She moved quietly to the kitchen. She turned on the small light above the stove, not the overhead, just that one, the warm amber one that made the kitchen look like a painting of a kitchen. She opened the cabinet, and there it was. The chamomile tea, same brand she and Leona used to drink during college finals. Same tin, slightly dented in the same place on the left side. She held it for a moment, ran her thumb over the dented place. She made tea, one-handed, slowly working around the cast. She sat at the kitchen table. Douglas appeared from wherever cats go in the night and took the chair across from her. He blinked. She blinked back. She sipped the tea. And then she let herself sit with the question she had been managing around for days. If I don't have Grant's house, where do I live? If I don't have Grant's name, who am I? I have been Mrs. Ashford for 2 years. Before that, I was almost a graduate student. Before that, I was Claire Hartwell, who kept notebooks and knew exactly what she wanted from her life. Somewhere between then and now, I stopped knowing what I wanted. I stopped reaching for things because reaching felt dangerous. I stopped having preferences because preferences led to confrontations. I ordered what seemed appropriate for the occasion. I became so good at managing everything that I managed myself right out of existence. No tears, just stillness. The deep, terrifying kind that is either the end of something or the beginning. The baby moved, slow and deliberate, like someone shifting in a chair. Claire put her hand on her stomach. She thought, okay, what do I still have? What survived? She thought, I like chamomile tea. I am certain about that. I like this small stove light better than the overhead. I like Douglas, who asks nothing of me except to be acknowledged. I like the park near this building. I used to run there before. I would like to run there again someday. I want my notebooks. I want my drafting tools. I want to choose my own doctor and my own apartment and the color of my own walls. I want my daughter to grow up knowing what it looks like when a woman knows who she is. She thought, that is not nothing. That is somewhere to start. She drank her tea until it was gone. Douglas blinked at her. Slow and solemn, she thought, The prison door has been unlocked the whole time. I built the walls. I stayed inside them. I told myself the walls were protecting me. She thought, I am done with those walls. She set down the mug. She went back to the guest room. She lay down. She slept. Not perfectly, not without waking, but she slept. Meanwhile, in the home office of the Ashford estate, Grant was awake too. He had received a preliminary notice from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office through his attorney, an audit, Ashford Defense Solutions, specifically the billing records on 2 government contracts totaling $140 million. His attorney called it routine and manageable. His attorney said those things in the voice that meant they were neither. Grant sat in his home office and looked at the official letterhead and thought about a small American flag emoji next to a name in a phone contact. He thought about how thoroughly he had miscalculated. He picked up the phone. He called a senator he had donated to for 12 years. The senator's office said the senator was unavailable. He called another contact, also unavailable. He thought, this is not coincidence. This is coordinated. He thought, she actually called Wade. After everything, she actually called him. He looked out at the perfectly maintained garden. The garden the landscaping company came twice a week to manage. Everything precisely placed. Nothing out of control. He thought, I may have made a significant mistake. He picked up his phone. He called his other attorney, not the family one, the criminal defense one he kept on retainer as a formality. It was not a formality anymore. Wade arrived on a Thursday. He drove himself from the airport. No aide. Civilian clothes. Dark gray sweater, dark jeans. He looked like himself, which somehow still read military adjacent in the way that certain people always carry their profession in their posture. He parked outside Leona's building and sent a text to the WH number. Claire buzzed him in. Leona announced with impressive casualness that she needed several things from the pharmacy and left carrying a bag the size of something that could accommodate a week's worth of groceries. Margaret Hartwell, who had moved from the pull-out sofa to the armchair over the past 3 days, said she was going to take a walk, and did so with the particular tactful speed of a mother who knows when to give her children space. Wade sat across from Claire in the living room. He looked at the cast. He looked at her face. The bruise was yellow-green now, healing in the particular way that looks worse before it looks better. He looked at her stomach. He looked at his hands. He did not say, I told you so. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, tell me how you're doing, not the logistics, how you actually are. Claire opened her mouth. She had a logistics answer ready. She had had a logistics answer ready since the hospital. The lawyer, the evidence, the protective order, the custody filing, the apartment research. She had been building the logistics like a structural model. Weight-bearing, precise. She let out a breath. She said, I'm scared. He said, of him? She said, no, not of him, specifically. I'm scared of... She paused. Of what comes next. I don't know what the next part of my life looks like. I've been someone's wife for 2 years. Before that, I was almost a graduate student. I don't know who I am right now. Wade nodded. He said, that's different from being scared of Grant. She said, I know. He said, that kind is better. That kind you can work with. She said, Wade, what are you doing? The audit, the federal investigation, the senator who stopped returning calls. He was quiet for a moment. He said, I surfaced information that was already there. Grant Ashford has been overbilling on defense contracts for at least 4 years. That is a federal crime that has nothing to do with you or your marriage. The fact that he also broke your arm is a state crime. Those move on completely separate tracks. She said, But they're both moving. He said, yes. She said, because you made calls. He said, because information moves when the right person asks the right questions. That's all that happened. She looked at her brother, at the specific quality of quiet in him. The kind of quiet that had rooms in it. She said, I should have called you 18 months ago. He said, yeah? A pause. He said, but you called when you called, and here we are. She said, are you angry with me for who I became in that marriage, for what I let happen? Wade said, Claire, her name, an anchor. He did that to you. You survived inside something that was designed to diminish you. That's different from causing it. That's different from failing. He said, he is very good at what he does. That's not a compliment. It's a description. The baby moved emphatically. Wade looked at her stomach. He said, boy or girl? She said, I think girl. He said, what are you going to name her? Nobody had asked her that. Grant had a list of Ashford family names. Claire had been managing around the list, neither accepting nor rejecting, just deferring. She thought for a moment. She said, Nora, after Mom's mother. He said, Nora Hartwell. She said, Nora Hartwell, not Ashford. Hartwell, a small word, the most important word. Wade nodded slowly. He said, good name. That afternoon, through his attorney, Grant made his counter-move. The letter was professionally worded and legally sophisticated. It stated that Grant Ashford intended to seek full custody of the child upon birth, citing Claire's mental health history, which did not exist, her abandonment of the marital home. She had been gone 4 days, and her association with parties hostile to Mr. Ashford's professional interests. The phrase, parties hostile to Mr. Ashford's professional interests, was the closest he could come to naming Wade in a legal document without naming him. Sylvia called Claire, she said. He filed, I expected this. She said, he's also requested a psychological evaluation of you. Claire said, he doesn't have anything real. Sylvia said, he doesn't need anything real. He needs delay. The evaluation process takes time. He is buying time for his financial team to manage the federal situation while making you appear unstable. She said, here's what we do. Sylvia filed for emergency protective custody that same afternoon. The grounds were specific. Documented domestic violence, evidence of a pattern of behavior over 18 months, medical forensic confirmation of the injury mechanism, and the statement of a household witness of 22 years. She also noted, in a supplemental filing, that a second individual, Paige Colton, 26, had filed an independent police report that morning regarding her own experience with Grant Ashford. Grant's attorneys had not anticipated Paige. The judge reviewing the emergency filing asked 3 questions. One of them was about why a man with 2 documented assault victims and a federal audit in progress was requesting a mental health evaluation of his wife. The temporary custody arrangement came back in Claire's favor. Sylvia called Claire with the news. Claire was sitting at Leona's kitchen table with Douglas on her feet and a cup of chamomile tea going cold. She heard the news. She said, thank you. She hung up. She sat with the phone in her lap. She thought about the ceiling tiles in the hospital room, 32 across, 14 down, 448. She thought, I have been counting things instead of speaking for 2 years. She thought, I am done counting. She looked at Douglas. Douglas blinked. She said, we're going to be okay. Douglas appeared to find this credible. The next 10 days did not look like courage from outside. From outside, they looked like paperwork. Phone calls, apartment listings on a laptop, choosing a pediatrician, opening a bank account. That is what courage actually looks like most of the time. Claire opened a bank account in her own name on a Tuesday morning. She had not had one in 2 years. Grant managed finances. He was generous. There was always money available. That was part of how it worked. The generosity as a system, the dependency as architecture. She sat in the bank with her arm in its cast and her stomach enormous, and she opened an account. The woman who helped her had reading glasses on a chain and did not ask any questions about the cast. Claire transferred the money that was legally hers before the marriage. It was not very much money by Ashford standards. It was enough. She reactivated the credit card she'd had since she was 22 and stopped using because Grant handled everything. She looked at apartment, not urgently, not desperately. 3 evenings at Leona's kitchen table, laptop open, tea beside her. She saved listings in a neighborhood she liked, near a park she used to run in, before Grant, before the marriage compressed her world to his preferences. The third-floor apartments had good light. She saved 3 of them. She texted Ruth. She wrote, "Would you want to work for someone who can't afford Ashford wages? I understand if the answer is no." Ruth responded in 30 seconds. She wrote, "When do I start?" Dorothy Ashford called on a Wednesday. It was the first time Dorothy had called since the hospital. Dorothy was 69 and had spent 4 decades building a world in which her son was insulated from consequences. She loved him the way particular mothers love particular sons, completely, specifically, and in a way that required everyone else to adjust. She did not hate Claire. She simply did not consider Claire's experience relevant to the larger project of protecting Grant. She said, "I hope you're proud of yourself. You have destroyed this family." Claire said, "Dorothy." Dorothy said, "After everything we've done for you, after everything Grant has." Claire said, "Dorothy, I'm going to hang up now. If you need to communicate with me about legal matters, please contact Sylvia Brooks." She hung up. She sat with the phone in her lap. She thought, 2 years ago, I would have apologized for that. I would have apologized for hanging up on her. I would have called back and explained and apologized again. She thought, 2 years ago, I apologized for everything, for my opinions, for the way I laughed too loud in restaurants, for having thoughts that didn't align with Grant's, for the sound of my voice when I disagreed, for taking up space. She thought, he never loved me. He loved what I represented, an educated, contained, beautiful woman who would not demand to be seen fully. The moment I started being fully visible, he started pushing harder to put me back in the frame. She put down the phone. She made herself tea. Douglas sat on her feet. She said, "Good cat." She was reading apartment listings that evening when Wade knocked on the doorframe of the kitchen. He was still in town. He had not announced he was staying. He had simply stayed. He sat down across from her. He looked at the laptop screen. He said, "Third floor?" She said, "The light is better." He looked at the listing for a moment. 2 bedrooms. A kitchen with a window facing east. Hardwood floors. A spare room she was already imagining painted a particular shade of pale yellow. He said, "It's a good place." She said, "I think so." He said, "Mom wants to stay for a while. Help with the baby." She said, "I know. I want that too." He said, "Claire." She looked at him. He said, "I want to say something." She waited. He said, "You are the strongest person I know, and I know generals." She said, "You keep saying that." He said, "It keeps being true." She looked at the apartment listing, at the east-facing kitchen window, at the 2 bedrooms, at the address near the park. She thought, Nora is going to grow up knowing what it looks like when a woman knows who she is. She is going to grow up with an outline. Her mother's outline, the real one. She thought, he never loved me. He loved the idea of me. She thought, I am going to spend the rest of my life being entirely too much of myself for that to have ever been enough for him. She thought, good. She closed the laptop. She said, Wade, what's the update on the federal situation? He said, the Inspector General's office opened a formal investigation 2 days ago. There are billing irregularities on at least 4 contracts. His financial team is scrambling. 2 board members have requested emergency meetings. The financial press picked up the story this morning. She said, is it going to stick? He said, yes. She said, will he go to prison? He was quiet for a moment, honest quiet. He said, I don't know yet. That depends on what the investigation finds and how his team manages it. What I can tell you is that the name Grant Ashford no longer opens every door it used to open, and that is not temporary. She nodded. She thought about what Sylvia had said. He will always have money. Men like that have layers of insulation, but he will, for the first time, be accountable. And accountability changes the shape of a life. She said, that's enough. She meant it. She was not performing forgiveness or wisdom or transcendence. She was not pretending she felt nothing about what he had done to her. She was simply stating a fact. That is enough. What is happening to him is enough. The rest of my energy belongs to my life. She reached for her tea. She thought, I am going to be seen now, all of me, the notebooks, the bridges, the load calculations, the stubbornness I inherited from my father. I am going to be so entirely myself that there is no room in my life for someone else's frame. Nora is going to know what that looks like. She drank her tea. It was the right temperature. She had made it herself. Labor began on a Tuesday, 4 a.m. Contractions 12 minutes apart. Claire lay still for 40 minutes, timing them with the app she had set up because she was organized even in extremis. When they reached 8 minutes apart, she got up, walked to Leona's door, and knocked. She said, I think it's time. Leona appeared in this doorway, wearing the expression of someone who had been sleeping very lightly in anticipation of exactly this. She said, I have had that bag packed for a week, and disappeared to get it. Margaret Hartwell was in the kitchen making tea before anyone asked her to. Wade arrived at the hospital at 6 a.m. He had not gone back to his base. He had not said this to Claire. He did not need to. Claire checked in. She was taken to her room. She was attended by Dr. Helen Marsh, who had been following Claire's care since the hospital admission and had made a point of being the attending physician for the delivery. Ruth arrived at 9 a.m. Leona had sent her a text. Ruth came directly from wherever she had been. She sat in the corner chair and folded her hands and was simply there. Her presence was a kind of warmth. Grant was not there. His attorney had sent a formal letter requesting notification of the birth. Sylvia had handled it. It was filed and processed. Grant was not there. The labor was long. In between contractions, in the stretches that were simply physical endurance, the room settled into something almost ordinary. Margaret held Claire's good hand. Leona kept the ice chips coming with the methodical efficiency of a pediatric nurse who had assisted at deliveries before and knew that ice chips were a form of love. Wade sat in the corner with his phone face down and his hands folded and his jaw doing the thing it did when he was being very still about something. He was not very still about this. During one of the between moments, Claire looked around the room. Her mother, her brother, her best friend, Ruth in the corner, Dr. Marsh checking in with professional warmth. This room full of people who had come without being asked, who had stayed without being asked, who were here because there was nowhere else they would rather be. She thought, this is what a room full of people who love you looks like. She thought, I forgot of this. Grant reduced my world so methodically and so slowly that I did not notice the walls until they were already very close. He did not take these people from me dramatically. He just made the space between us and them smaller and smaller until it felt like they were very far away. She thought, never again. Wade said from his corner, "How you doing?" She said, "I've been better." He said, "You've also been worse." She said, "Fair point." He said, "You're the strongest person I know." She said, "You keep saying that." He said, "You keep doing things that make it true." She laughed. It hurt. A contraction arrived at exactly that moment, which was poor timing, but the laugh came out real, the kind she had not had in a long time, real and clear and entirely hers. Nora arrived at 2:17 in the afternoon. 6 pounds, 11 ounces, a full head of dark hair, the expression of a philosopher who has just been interrupted mid-thought and is not pleased about it. She was placed on Claire's chest. Claire held her. There are moments that do not need description, that exceed description, that are simply present. This was one. A small weight, a small face, entirely new and somehow entirely known. Claire said, "Hi, Nora." Nora said nothing. She was considering things. In the corner, Wade pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling with great determination. The evidence of what he was actually feeling was clear to everyone in the room. He would deny it later, comprehensively. Margaret Hartwell wept without any attempt at concealment. Leona took photographs while also crying, which required impressive coordination. Ruth sat very still in her corner chair and looked at the window and blinked several times. Claire held her daughter. She thought, "This is mine. This is actually, truly, completely mine. Not the nursery in the Ashford estate. Not the hand-painted clouds on the ceiling that someone else chose. Not the custom crib from Vermont that was beautiful and impersonal. Not the version of motherhood designed to go with the house. This specific, furious, philosophical, perfect person. This is mine." She held her. The room was full of people who loved her. She thought, "This is where I start." The legal proceedings concluded their first significant wave in the weeks that followed. Grant's request for full custody was denied. The record was clear. The judge had read everything. She had particular questions about the psychological evaluation request that Grant's attorneys found difficult to answer without making things worse. Grant was granted supervised visitation, structured schedule, neutral location, family coordinator present, review in 18 months. The federal investigation proceeded separately. Formal indictment on charges of contract fraud and overbilling came down on a Thursday. 2 board members had cooperated with investigators. Grant's lead attorney told him privately that the best possible outcome was a negotiated plea. Grant had not accepted this yet. The Ashford estate was not in Claire's name. She did not want it. She had chosen the apartment near the park. 3rd floor, east-facing kitchen. 2 bedrooms. Ruth was there on moving day. Margaret was there, Leona was there, directing the placement of furniture with the confidence of someone who had strong opinions about traffic flow in small spaces. Wade was in the kitchen assembling a bookshelf, according to his own interpretation of the instructions, which differed significantly from the manufacturer's interpretation. He was not acknowledging this. Claire stood in the apartment before the boxes were unpacked, just stood in the middle of the living room. The light coming through the east windows, the new walls, the space. She spread her hands slightly at her sides, just to feel it, hers. 3 months after Nora arrived, the world had reorganized itself around a new center. Nora was the center. She was 3 months old and had recently graduated from philosophical outrage about existence to occasional approval of it. She approved of mornings. She approved of Douglas, who had been introduced on visiting day with great ceremony and who regarded her with surprised respect. She approved of being carried, facing outward, so she could survey her domain. She had strong opinions. She came by them honestly. Claire's mornings began at 6, not because she had to be anywhere, because the apartment faced east and the light came in at 6, and Nora understood that morning was a fact regardless of anyone's preferences about it. Claire dressed herself, made her choices without consulting anyone's aesthetic preferences except her own. She found she liked the slightly oversized linen shirt, the dark jeans, the comfortable shoes she had stopped wearing because Grant thought they looked too casual. She made coffee. She stood at the east window and drank it while it was still hot. She had stopped apologizing, not in the dramatic sense. She had not made an announcement. She had simply noticed, somewhere around week 4 of the new apartment, that she was no longer arranging her words to preempt someone else's reaction. She was simply saying what she meant. It felt strange. Then it felt normal. Then it felt like something she should have done years ago. The drafting board was in the corner of the living room. She had found it on a second-hand website. Old-fashioned, real tilted surface, heavy. It arrived on a Saturday morning, and she set it up herself. Mostly herself, with some unhelpful input from Wade via video call. She had sketched for the first time 3 weeks ago. Just lines, just bridges, the way she used to draw them at 23. The specific pleasure of the pencil on paper, the clean logic of a thing designed to span something. She had 40 notebooks on a shelf, all 40, retrieved from a storage room in the Ashford estate where Sylvia's team had located them among Claire's personal property. They arrived in a box that had been very carefully packed. The seal was still intact. Grant had not opened them. He probably had not known what they were. She had not opened them yet either. She was not in a hurry. They were there, on the shelf, all 40. That was enough for now. She had made inquiries to Columbia's architecture program. There was a part-time track, a path for returning students who had been away from the field. The chair of the program was a woman she had been corresponding with by email. The correspondence had been easy in the way conversations are easy when two people are speaking the same language. It was not the same path she had deferred at 26. It was a different path, with a different woman on it. She was entirely okay with that. Ruth came 3 mornings a week. She arrived at 8, made tea, and spent the first 20 minutes telling Claire things she had observed about Nora, that Claire had also observed, but that they enjoyed discussing anyway. Then Ruth took Nora so Claire could have 2 hours that were entirely hers. 2 hours for the drafting board, 2 hours for the notebooks, 2 hours for the correspondence with Columbia. Ruth and Claire had become friends, real ones. The kind that emerge between people who have seen each other in difficult circumstances and chosen to keep showing up. Leona came on Sundays. Margaret came every other weekend from Roanoke, arriving on Friday evening with her overnight bag and her particular chicken stew recipe, the one she'd made for Wade's first deployment and Claire's college graduation, and every other occasion that required comfort to be expressed through food. Wade video called every few days. He had taken to FaceTiming specifically to make faces at Nora, who regarded the phone screen with deep suspicion, which he found enormously entertaining. The federal case against Grant Ashford was progressing. His attorneys were negotiating. The outcome was not yet determined. 2 of his contracts had been terminated. 1 subsidiary had been sold. The financial news had moved on to other stories, the way financial news does, but the record existed. The facts existed. Grant Ashford was accountable for the first time in his adult life. The shape of his world had changed permanently. Claire did not track this closely. She had looked, once, at a news article. She had read the headline. She had felt something she spent a moment identifying. Satisfaction. Mild. The kind you feel when a calculation resolves correctly. Then she had closed the browser and gone to look at apartment paint samples. She had chosen the pale yellow for Nora's room herself. From an actual paint chip she held up to the light at 10 in the morning to see what it would look like in the best light. She had taken it home and taped it to the wall and looked at it for 2 days before she decided yes. That one. That exact one. It was perfect. On a Friday, in early spring, there was an architecture presentation at the city library. A former professor of Claire's, someone she had studied under briefly before the deferrals began, was giving a public lecture on structural design principles and contemporary urban planning. She had seen the announcement online. She had wanted to go. She went. She carried Nora in a front carrier. Nora wore a yellow hat and surveyed the library with her characteristic expression of philosophical assessment. The lecture was good, the kind of good that reminded her why she had wanted this, the specificity of it, the particular pleasure of being in a room with people who found the same things interesting that she found interesting. Afterward, people gathered in the atrium. Drinks, conversation, the comfortable hum of people who shared a professional language. She was talking to a former classmate, someone from the program she had been 2 semesters into before the first deferral, when she saw Grant. He was across the atrium. He was there for something else. A donor board event, from the look of it. His people were recognizable. He had not yet seen her. She saw him first. She went very still. She waited. She waited for the old response, the system that had been so embedded in her body for 2 years. The bracing, the reading of the room, the preemptive adjustment of herself to accommodate his presence, the fear. She waited. The system did not come online. She looked at him across the atrium. He was in a dark suit. He looked. She assessed this without drama, diminished. Not physically, but there was something around the edges of him that had not been there before. The ease was different. The certainty that he moved through rooms and rooms moved for him. That was different. He looked up. He saw her. She met his eyes, steady, clear, from a place that was entirely her own. She felt nothing. Not dramatically nothing, not performed nothing, just nothing. The specific, quiet nothing of looking at a house you used to live in and understanding that it is simply a building. It once had a context that made it significant. The context has changed. The building is just a building. He looked away first. She turned back to her former classmate. The professor, her former professor, came over. He was in his late 50s, enthusiastic in the way of people who find their work genuinely interesting. He shook her hand. He looked at Nora with the polite interest of someone who did not know quite what to say to a baby, but was trying. He said, "Claire, I'd heard you were back in the city. Are you practicing?" She said, "Not yet. I'm in the process of coming back to it." He said, "You should. I remember your load distribution work from the second semester, that bridge series." She said, "I still have those notebooks." His eyebrows rose. He started talking about the fellowship program, a new initiative through the university, paid, part-time, focused specifically on structural design, open to practitioners returning to the field after a hiatus. He described it with the quiet enthusiasm of someone who believed in what they were describing. Claire was listening. She was genuinely, completely listening. Not managing, not calculating how to respond, just listening and thinking and already forming questions. She said, "When does the application period open?" He said, "It's actually open now. The deadline is 6 weeks out." He said, "Have you given any thought to applying?" She said, "Actually, yes." He looked at her. The particular look of someone who has just realized they are talking to someone they should have been talking to for longer. He said, "You should apply. I mean that. I would support the application." She said, "I know what the work looks like. I have 40 notebooks." He laughed. Not the polite kind, the real kind. Nora, in the carrier against Claire's chest, had been quiet during this exchange, assessing, taking the measure of the situation. She had her mother's particular quality of observation. She watched before she committed to anything. Now she made a sound, the sound she made when she approved of something. A small, definitive vocalization, somewhere between a sigh and a statement. The professor looked at her. His expression did the thing that Nora's expressions reliably produced in adults. He said, "She has opinions?" Claire said, "She gets it from me." She said it easily, without apology, without modifying it. She said it like a woman who knew exactly who she was. She smiled. Real, easy, hers. She thought, I lost myself for 2 years. I gave myself away piece by piece, thinking I was being practical, thinking I was being strong, thinking I was managing something manageable. She thought, I know what I actually gave away now. I gave away the woman who kept notebooks and drew bridges and argued about structural philosophy for 4 hours without running out of things to say. I gave her away and told myself she was optional, that the practical version of me, the one who fitted Grant's frame, was the real version. She thought she was never optional. She was always the real one. She thought, I am going to spend the rest of my life as entirely, stubbornly, inconveniently myself as possible. I am going to take up exactly as much space as I actually require. I am going to apply for the fellowship. I am going to open those notebooks. I am going to watch Nora grow up knowing what it looks like when a woman does not apologize for being fully present in her own life. She thought, that is the work. Not the dramatic kind, not the revenge kind, the daily, ordinary, revolutionary work of being exactly who you are. She thought, I can do that. She had always been able to do that. She had just forgotten for a while. She said goodbye to her former professor. She got his card. She promised to send the application before the deadline. She walked through the atrium toward the exit, Nora against her chest, her footsteps steady on the marble floor. She passed through the door, into the spring evening. The light was very good, the kind of late afternoon light that makes everything look like it was just starting. She stood on the library steps for a moment. She thought about the notebook she had opened the week before. The 8th one, from when she was 23. The bridge sketch, the handwriting below it. A bridge doesn't fight the river. It spans it. The load is distributed. The weight is shared. That's how you hold something. She had written that at 23 and not understood yet how completely it applied to everything. Weight is meant to be distributed. That is how structures survive. No single point is supposed to hold everything alone. When you design a bridge to put the entire load on one point, it will fail. It will always fail. The math is not interested in exception. She had been trying to hold everything alone for 2 years. She had designed herself as a single, load-bearing point for an entire structure. She had been failing slowly and calling it management. She thought, a good architect knows the difference between load-bearing and just bearing. She put her hand on Nora's back. The small warmth of her, the specific particular reality of her. She thought, Nora Hartwell, my daughter, my person, my future. She thought, I am going to show you everything. The notebooks, the bridges, the light in the east window in the morning, chamomile tea and Douglas in the park nearby, and the specific pleasure of a good pencil on drafting paper. I am going to show you what it looks like when a woman knows herself so completely that nobody else gets to define the outline. She thought, that is the only thing worth leaving behind. She stepped down from the library steps. She walked toward the parking lot. The evening was warm. The spring air smelled like cut grass and distance. She did not look back. She had somewhere to be. She was already on her way.
There is something I want to say before we leave Claire's story behind, because this was never really just a story about a broken arm, or a billionaire, or a general. It was a story about something much quieter and much more dangerous than any of those things. It was a story about what happens when a woman slowly stops being herself. Not dramatically, not all at once, not because someone ripped something away from her, but because she made small trades, one by one, over time. She deferred her education for a year, then another. She stopped calling her brother as often. She let the visits with her mother become less frequent. She stopped reaching for the things she wanted because reaching had started to feel like a provocation. She packed her notebooks in a box, and she called it practical. That is the part of this story I want you to sit with. Because the world talks a lot about dramatic abuse, the visible kind, the kind that is easy to name and easy to point to. And that kind is real, and it matters. But there is another kind that is harder to see. The kind that happens so slowly you do not notice the walls until they are already close. The kind where someone manages your world, reduces it, makes the people who love you feel very far away, makes your own desires feel unreasonable, makes you so fluent in someone else's preferences that you forget your own. The kind where one day you are sitting in a hospital room and you do not recognize yourself in the window. Not because you look different, because you look exactly as you have been trained to look. That is the lesson here. And it is not a lesson about other women in difficult situations. It is a lesson about all of us, about how easy it is to trade small pieces of yourself for security, for approval, for the feeling of being chosen, about how the trades feel reasonable in the moment, and then one day you open a box and there are 40 notebooks in it and you think, who was that woman? And why did I let her go? Claire got her notebooks back. She got her name back. She got Nora, her daughter, Nora Hartwell, not Nora Ashford. That detail matters more than anything else in this story. She did not just survive, she recovered herself, and that is the work. Not the dramatic kind, not the revenge kind, the quiet, daily, revolutionary work of knowing who you are so completely that no one else gets to define the outline. The work of staying in contact with your own desires, your own preferences, the specific small things that are only yours. The chamomile tea, the east-facing window, the pencil on drafting paper. The work of keeping your own name. Whatever you are carrying right now, whatever small trades you have been making, whatever parts of yourself you have packed in boxes and told yourself were optional. I want you to hear this. They are not optional. You are not optional. The woman you were before the compromises, before the adjustments, before you got so good at managing other people's reactions that you forgot to have your own. She is still in there. She is still exactly who she was, and she has been waiting. Not because she is weak, because she is patient, because she knows, peace. The way Claire knew at 3:14 in the morning in Leona's kitchen that the door has been unlocked the whole time. You just have to decide to walk through it. That is enough for today. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If this story moves you, drop a comment and tell me what you felt. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. This content was manually researched, developed, and edited by our team with the intention of bringing meaning, healing, and honest storytelling to every person who needs it. We do not create content to fill time. We create it because somewhere, someone is sitting in a hospital room or a kitchen at 3 in the morning, and they need to know they are not alone. That what happened to them was real, that they are still there, underneath everything. That is why we do this work, and that is why your support, every like, every share, every comment, means more than you know. Until next time.